This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitahone, and it's Monday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. It's getting colder and colder outside right now if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, so I thought it would be a good time to take a look at one of Magic's coldest sets, Ice Age. Over the years, I've looked at a lot of sets in this series, and my goal is eventually to take a look at every single set in Magic, and we're getting another one done today. Ice Age was released in 1995, and it was actually the first set ever to be released using the block format, as it was the first set in Ice Age block. Before Ice Age, there were just individual sets released without any direct connection between one or another. While some sets from this era of Magic are pretty underpowered, that's not really true for Ice Age, as we'll see several really important cards were originally printed in this set. 51 cards in this set have at least a single point using my scoring system. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be originally printed in Ice Age. That means that 346 cards were eligible for this video, and in this video we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8, this includes events like set championships and pro tours, is worth 2 points, and a second tier top 8, which includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Fests, is worth 1 point. At number 10, it's Tinder Wall. This 1 mana 0/3 wall comes with some nice utility, as it can cash itself in for 2 red mana or sacrifice itself to do 2 damage to something it's blocking. Obviously, the first option is the more exciting one, as it allows you to get a 1-turn mana boost, something that is quite powerful in Magic. The wall is used in Goblin Charbelcher decks in Legacy, which run somewhere between 0 and 2 lands, so that the single activation of the Belcher will one-shot the opponent. As a result, the deck has to run some non-land sources of mana so that it can power out and activate the Belcher, and Tinder Wall is a big part of that type of deck. I'm not going to go ultra deep on the Belcher deck here, but if you want to know more about it, I did do a whole deck history video on it. In addition to being played in Legacy Belcher, Tinder Wall has also found success in Pauper Wall decks that seek to combine Axebane Guardian and Galvanic Alchemist to produce infinite mana, and obviously Tinder Wall can help the deck out by being a creature with Defender and having the ability to make mana all on its own. Tinder Wall is very likely to continue to gain points going forward. At number 9, I have Knight of Stromgald. The Knight is a pretty efficient creature, even by today's standards. A 2 mana 2/1 with protection from white that can give itself first strike and pump its power is very nice. It's both hard to block and hard to attack through. It was played in mono black aggro decks while it was in standard, and it was also played in Necropotence decks in both standard and extended. It hasn't gained any points since 1998, so it is highly unlikely it's gaining any more in the future. At number 8, it is Demonic Consultation. It's an interesting take on a tutor effect, since you name a card and dig through your deck 6 cards at a time until you get the card. Exiling a bunch of your library can be a pretty real cost, but 1 mana to get any card you want in your deck is a big deal, especially on an instant. In Standard, it was played in Necropotence decks, which were all about finding that powerful enchantment, and the Consultation obviously did the job. I've already mentioned Necropotence twice. It will show up later on this list, and we'll go deeper on that card when we get there. But basically, Consultation was way too good and made decks too consistent. Ultimately, ended up getting restricted in Vintage and banned in Legacy and Extended. 1 copy of the card shows up in various Vintage decks, generally, decks really built around getting a specific card in play, like Oath of Druids and Doomsday. It's likely to continue to gain points in Vintage. At number 7, it is Fyndhorn Elves. This card might seem familiar to you even if you've never seen it, because it is functionally identical to 2 better-known 1 mana 1/1 mana Doric Elves, Elvish Mystic, and Llanowar Elves. It has way fewer points than either of those, though. They both have over 100, because unlike them, it's never been reprinted in a standard legal set. Like all mana elves, Fyndhorn Elves is great because it lets you play your 3 mana cards on turn 2, 4 mana cards on turn 3, and so forth, and that can give you a major advantage over your opponent. It was played in a wide variety of decks in block, standard, and extended, especially in aggro and land destruction decks. If you planned on casting a symmetrical land destruction effect like Armageddon, Fyndhorn Elves was nice because it could continue to provide mana for you. In Legacy and Pauper, Fyndhorn Elves' creature type really matters, as it sees play in elf tribal decks in both of those formats. It's likely to continue to gain points going forward. At number 6, it is Portend. This is a delayed cantrip that lets you reorder cards on top of your library or just shuffle it. It didn't really see any play back when it was printed because this type of effect needs the exact right kind of deck to matter. There are plenty of cantrips out there with more meaningful effects, so there's no reason to run this unless that effect does matter. In Legacy, it's been played in Miracle decks, which get super discounted spells if you draw a Miracle off the top, and in Vintage, it's been played in Doomsday decks, which seek to win the game with Thassa's Oracle. Reorganizing cards either pre or post Doomsday can make sure you win the game. Both of these decks are still pretty legit in their respective formats, so it's likely it continues to gain points in the future. At number 5, it is Zurin Orb. Zero mana cards always have huge potential to be powerhouses, and that is certainly the case here. The orb lets you give up lands to gain life, and while that's obviously a pretty steep cost, there were plenty of decks that were interested in making that deal. In Ice Age block, control decks combined it with Thawing Glaciers. By fetching a land and sacrificing it every turn, the control decks could easily have enough life to beat more aggressive opponents. Both the Orb and Glaciers were actually banned in the format because of how good that was. It was played in lots of standard constructed decks too, where it can be combined with land tax and get similar value. The Orb is also pretty sweet in Armageddon decks, as you could sacrifice all your mana to gain all the life, and then nuke all the lands anyway. It was even sweeter alongside Balance, as you could make sure all of your opponent's lands got nuked. Like a lot of cards on this list, it was also quite good with Necropotence. So yeah, the Orb had lots of great decks to be in, and ultimately got restricted in Standard to power down all of those decks. More recently, it's been played in Legacy lands and Canadian Threshold. At number 5, it is Necropotence, one of the most well-known cards from Ice Age. It lets you pay life to draw cards, although it does take you a full turn to get those cards in your hand, so it isn't immediate. Necropotence is a card that was famously underrated by people when it came out, as people couldn't imagine the downside on the card would be worth it. People quickly realized they were wrong once they started playing with Necropotence in Standard, Extended, and Legacy. Turns out being able to draw a bunch of cards for no mana is pretty great. That was especially true in decks built around the powerful enchantment, which ran several drain life type effects so that it could just keep you gaining life and drawing more cards, and Zurin Orb also went quite well here. The card was so out of control by 2000 and 2001 that it was banned in Legacy and Extended, and restricted in Vintage. Necropotence has actually enjoyed a little bit of a renaissance lately, as Doomsday decks have become top tier in Vintage. We've already seen 3 cards on this list that are played in Doomsday decks, which is a pretty interesting coincidence. As I said before, these decks generally try to win the game with Thassa's Oracle and Doomsday, and Necropotence can help you out by finding your Doomsday, and you can also use Necropotence to just get rid of your remaining library to make the Oracle win a little bit sooner. I actually did a whole deck history video on Necropotence decks, so if you're interested in learning more, check that video out. At any rate, Necropotence is likely to gain more points in the future. At number 3, it's Incinerate, a really nice burn spell. For 2 mana, it lets you do 3 damage to any target, and it even turns off the ability of the creature to regenerate. Incinerate has the benefit of being reprinted, including in Mirage 10th edition and Magic 2012. A card like Incinerate is virtually always going to see play in block and standard formats it's part of, as it's just an excellent rate for just about any red deck. If it were reprinted in a standard legal set today, it would almost certainly see play. It won't ever be reprinted though, not because it's too good, but because Regenerate isn't a thing in the game anymore, so it would be kind of silly. But yeah, aggro decks love having efficient removal like this to blow blockers out of the way, especially when the card has the upside of finishing the opponent off, and more controlling decks also find the efficiency of this type of card pretty appealing. As a result, it saw a lot of play in the various formats it's been legal in over the years. It hasn't gained any points since 2015 though, and it isn't ultra likely to gain more going forward. The formats it's legal in today have way better burn spells, and it also won't ever be reprinted. At number 2, I actually have 2 cards, both Hydroblast and Pyroblast, and this is because they are a mirrored pair of Color Hosers, and because they would have been number 2 and number 3 anyway. These 2 spells either allow you to destroy a permanent of the enemy color, or counter a spell of the enemy color. The modality here is nice because it means that if you draw this and your opponent has already played a card you're afraid of, you can still deal with it, and if you draw it while waiting for something to come out that you're really afraid of, you can hold on to it to counter it later. While they only hate on one single color, it's hard to outdo the efficiency of being able to do this for a single mana. As a result, over the years, these cards have seen tons and tons of sideboard play in multiple formats, and they're going to continue to. However, they are never going to surpass the number 1 card on this list, which has an absolutely massive lead, and that card is Brainstorm. This probably doesn't come as a huge surprise to you. unless you didn't realize the card was originally printed in Ice Age. Brainstorm has seen play in multiple formats, and it's a format-defining card in Legacy especially. It's just a great deal. You pay 1 mana to draw 3 cards, and then you put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library, and that's some powerful card selection. It gets an extra boost too in decks that can shuffle their deck easily, because if you put 2 extra lands on top of your library, you really don't want to be drawing them. This is often accomplished with fetch lands. While obviously being a huge factor in Legacy, Brainstorm has made its mark on other formats too. It's restricted in Vintage, but most blue decks in the format tend to run the single copy of the card that is allowed. It was also printed in the Strixhaven Mystical Archive, which gave it legality in Historic, but it proved to be way too good in the format and got banned there. Brainstorm is going to continue to see a ton of play, especially in Legacy, and there's basically no chance that any card from Ice Age ever passes it. Well, those are the 10 cards from Ice Age that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to catch up on MTG top 10s from the past, including several others that look at specific sets, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. If you want to stay aware of future videos, you should subscribe and turn on notifications. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.